Give me my cue when I should start, right? Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good morning. We are here for a momentous occasion, the very first match of what will be many exciting matches in the International Reparation Debate Competition 2025. This competition will see Caribbean nations all across the region competing, battling it out, debating, fighting it out to see who will be crowned the Caribbean champion. We have teams from many different countries within the Caribbean. We have teams from Jamaica, we have teams from Guyana, we have teams from Barbados, we have teams from Trinidad and Tobago, we have teams from all over. And of course, this competition would not be possible without some wonderful and very gracious partners who, along with the owners, the Caribbean Reparation Research, Center for Reparations Research, rather, have worked together to put forward this mission. Reparations is a big deal. It's something that is very important. And we're very happy with the following partners to coming online. Partners such as the University of the West Indies, CARICOM Reparations Commission, the Center for Reparations Research, JADE, the Repair Campaign, the PJ Patterson Institute for Africa Caribbean Public Advocacy, and the University of Hull. It would not have been possible without the engagement and passion from these our many, many partners. Now, ladies and gentlemen, again, welcome. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews, and I will be serving as your chair judge for this competition. Joining me are two other judges who I'll now invite to introduce themselves, starting, of course, with Mr. Jermaine Barrett, founder and executive director for JADE.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so very much for being here and looking forward to an exciting match. Of course, I'm Jermaine Barrett. I'm the founder and executive director of the Jamaican Association for Debating and Empowerment.
Thank you very much, Jermaine. And a fun fact about Jermaine, he is one of the most visionary people I know, even though he is blind. And also joining me on the panel is Miss Calicia T. Vassell.
Good morning, everybody. All the best with today's match. I'm looking forward to an exciting exchange of arguments and ideas. Thank you.
Thank you, Calicia. We three judges will be the determiners of who will be advancing to round two. And the two teams vying up for that spot in round two are Barrackpore West Secondary School from Trinidad and Tobago and the Queen's College from Guyana. And we're going to invite the team members from Barrackpore West to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Caitlin Mohammed, and I'm the Prime Minister for today's challenge.
Hi, good morning. My name is Shalon Ramdan, Deputy Prime Minister.
Hi, good morning. My name is Kawan Ramsran, Member of the Government.
Thank you very much, Team Barrackpore West Secondary School. And in similar fashion, we invite the Queen's School to introduce themselves.
Good morning. We are here representing Queen's College. My name is Akila Harden. I am the leader of the opposition.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Surya Walcott, and I'm the second speaker for the opposition.
And good morning, everyone. My name is Arthur Roberts, and I'm the third speaker of the opposition.
Thank you very much to the Queen's College. Now, the motion that we will be debating today, this House believes that enslaved people were the primary agents of their own freedom. Once more, this House believes that enslaved This house believes that enslaved people were the primary agents of their own freedom. Teams have already been briefed on the rules. With no further delays, we open this very first match by inviting the first speaker to open the case. Speaker, the floor is yours.
Excuse me, sir. Sorry to interrupt, but that's not the motion we have on our side.
The motion that you have is this House believes that South Africa's truth and reconciliation process.
Yes, that's our motion.
All right, indeed. This House believes that South Africa's truth and reconciliation process was an effective model for reparatory justice. Once more, this House believes that South Africa's truth and reconciliation process was an effective model for reparatory justice. All right. For real this time, Barrackpore West, the floor is yours.
Honorable guests, esteemed colleagues, and fellow advocates for justice, this House believes that South Africa's truth and reconciliation process was an effective model for reparatory justice. Oxford Dictionary defines the word effective as producing the result that is wanted or intended, while it defines perfect as having everything that is necessary, complete, and without faults or weaknesses. We, the government, would like to make it abundantly clear this motion is in no way claiming that the TR process was perfect. Rather, for its intents and purposes, it was effective. To measure effectiveness, we must examine closely the mandate of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The TRC's mandate was uncovering the truth, granting amnesty, promoting reconciliation, recommending reparations, and preventing future violation. Legal scholar Michael Alberstein purports that an effective model for a justice process is one that ensures fairness, transparency, and equitable treatment for all parties involved. Today, I stand before you making a compelling case for why South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, serves as an effective model for reparatory justice. The South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC, stands as a groundbreaking example of reparatory justice, successfully fulfilling its mandate through uncovering the truth, granting amnesty, promoting reconciliation, recommending reparations, and preventing future human rights violation. The TRC's achievement in these areas demonstrate that restorative approaches to justice can effectively address historical injustices while fostering national unity and justice. One of the TRC's most significant achievements was uncovering the truth about human rights violations during the apartheid. By providing a platform for victims and perpetrators to testify, the commissioner documented widespread abuses, including torture, extrajudicial killings, and systemic discrimination. This public acknowledgement was crucial in validating the suffering of victims and establishing an accurate historical record, which remains a critical foundation for national healing and justice. The TRC conditional amnesty process was a unique mechanism that balanced justice with reconciliation. Rather than blanket impunity, perpetrators were required to fully disclose their crimes in order to qualify for amnesty. This approach incentivized truth-telling while also preventing cycles of retribution. By granting amnesty based on transparency rather than punishment, the TRC facilitated a transition from authoritarian rule to democracy without plunging the country into further conflict. A key objective of the TRC was foster national reconciliation. By allowing victims to confront perpetrators in a controlled setting, the Commission provided a forum for acknowledgement, remorse, and in some cases, forgiveness. The emotional and symbolic powers of these interactions helped to bridge deep divisions created by apartheid. Additionally, the TRC's work underscored the importance of collective responsibility and national unity, which were essential for South Africa's democratic future. Recognizing the truth alone was insufficient for justice. The TRC recommended various reparations for victims, including financial compensation, community rehabilitation programs, and memorialization initiative. While the government implemented these programs, it provided a forum for acknowledgement, remorse, and in some cases, forgiveness. TRC's framework underscored the necessities of material redress to complement symbolic reconciliation. This model highlights how truth commissions can integrate reparative measures to ensure meaningful justice for affected individuals and communities. The TRC also played a crucial role in preventing future human rights violations by identifying the structural cause of apartheid-era abuses and proposing reforms to prevent their reoccurrence. Through its final reports, the Commission outlined legislative and institutional changes necessary to uphold human rights in post-apartheid South Africa. While challenges remain, the TRC emphasis on accountability and institutional reform set a precedent for transitional justice processes worldwide. The effectiveness of TRC has led other post-conflict societies to study and adapt its methods in their own reconciliation and reparation movements. Countries such as Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Canada, and Colombia have drawn from South Africa's experience to develop their own truth commission and justice mechanism. Rwanda. Following the 1994 genocide, Rwanda established the Gacaca courts to address crimes committed during the violence. While different from the TRC in structure, the Gacaca system embraced public truth-telling and community-based reconciliation, mirroring elements of South Africa's process. Sierra Leone. After its brutal civil war, Sierra Leone implemented a Truth and Reconciliation Commission modeled on South Africa's TRC, focusing on truth-seeking, victim narrative, and institutional reform, alongside a special court for criminal accountability. The South Africa TRC exemplifies an effective model of reparatory justice by addressing past atrocities while laying the groundwork for more inclusive society. Its comprehensive approach, truth-seeking, conditional amnesty, reconciliation efforts, reparation, and preventive measures demonstrates the potential of Truth Commission to balance justice with national healing. Furthermore, its influence on post-conflict societies such as Rwanda, Sierra Leone, Canada, and Colombia highlights its enduring relevance as a framework for transitional justice. Despite some shortcomings, the TRC's success in fostering dialogue, accountability, and systemic reform makes it a powerful reference for other nations grappling with historical injustices. I thank you.
And thank you very much to the first speaker. We now invite the first speaker from the Queen's College to open the case for team opposition.
Esteemed judges, honorable speaker, members of the government, distinguished audience, good morning to you all. It is both an honor and a privilege to stand before you as the first speaker of the opposition to challenge the motion, quote, "This House believes that South Africa's truth and reconciliation process was an effective model for reparatory justice." While the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC, played a role in uncovering historical injustices, we must ask, not merely a symbolic gesture. As Professor Mahmoud Mamdani stated, the TRC sought reconciliation through truth-telling, but its failure to fully implement reparations highlights the limitations of transitional justice when economic injustices remain unaddressed. As the proper model for reparatory justice, as it ultimately failed those that it aimed to serve. Before we begin our argument, I'd like to adapt the definition of the key term put forward by the proposition, whereby they define effective as producing the intended or a successful result. However, I would like to clarify that this word is not to be put against the model itself, but rather its effectiveness as a model for reparatory justice and how successful it was at carrying out that task. With this in mind, I will now present 3 compelling arguments against the motion. First, the TRC prioritized amnesty over justice, which undermined accountability. The TRC, led by Archbishop Desmond Tutu, was intended to foster justice and national healing post-apartheid as a crime against humanity, an oppressive system upheld using inhumane acts. Therefore, it would not be far from the truth to say that the TRC allowed for criminals to walk free in exchange for confessions, regardless of the severity of their crimes or whether or not they apologize or show remorse for these actions. A part of the TRC's final report in 1998, the committee were denied it. However, in reality, very few cases were prosecuted, and it allowed for many perpetrators to evade accountability. Members of the audience, how can this be considered fair? How is this just? The learned members of the proposition may argue that the granting of amnesty as opposed to prosecution was necessary for reconciliation. But how do we justify this to the families of the 2,000 South Africans who were disappeared during the apartheid era, or to the parents of the 600 to 700 children who were killed in the 1976 Soweto uprising, or even to the victims of other atrocities so heinous that it led to threats of international sanctions against South Africa from 1956 all the way into the late 1980s? Mahatma Gandhi said, "An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind," and the opposition recognizes this. However, such a blatant human rights violation as this one should not have gone unpunished, and the failure of the TRC's process is to be blamed. Second, the truth-telling severely strained victims' mental health. The TRC emphasized public testimonies as they believed that raw retellings were essential to uncovering the truth and moving the nation forward. However, these testimonies place significant psychosocial burdens on the victims of these crimes. A 2007 study by the University of Pretoria found that recounting apartheid-era trauma often exacerbated emotions, including denial and repressed grief, intensifying suffering rather than aiding healing. Dr. Derek Summerfield, who was a South African psychologist, argued in the British Medical Journal that the TRC's approach failed to address the deep psychological and social wounds of apartheid. He emphasized the need for comprehensive mental health support and cautioned against seeing the TRC as a cure-all for national healing. Moreover, there is very little empirical evidence that proves that participating in the TRC's hearing improves psychological outcomes. As a matter of fact, there is even more evidence that it did quite the opposite. Take, for example, Churchill Makenge, who said on a CBS interview during the testimonies, he was a victim of these crimes. His wife and his brother had been murdered by apartheid brutality. He said, quote, he wishes that the people who are responsible for these crimes would hang. Finally, lack of material compensation. Reparatory justice hinges on reparations, which, as outlined in 20 questions and answers on reparations, a publication by the CRR, includes restitution, rehabilitation, satisfaction, guarantees of non-repetition, and most importantly, compensation. The TRC's official report, 1998, outlined a comprehensive reparations plan, yet the government failed to fully implement it. Instead of the proposed 6 years of annual payments, victims received a one-time grant, and this grant was only paid to 23,000 registered victims, sidelining millions of other non-white South Africans who were unable to register. The wealth tax that was suggested to be implemented against industries who profited from apartheid was never implemented, and reparations funds were redirected towards medical and educational aid, once again for registered victims, sidelining countless others. And the proposition may argue that, these recommendations were not time-bound and they could still be implemented in the future, but doesn't this only demonstrate the TRC's inherent defects? When will these recommendations be enacted? What generation of the descendants of these victims are expected to benefit from these reparations? Moreover, the TRC's recommendations for compensations were just that, recommendations. The commission itself had no authority to implement them. How then can we view this process as an effective model for reparatory justice if the very body proposing the solutions lack the power to make them a reality? In conclusion, we must acknowledge that simply uncovering the truth is not enough. We need a system equally committed to making things right. While the TRC's process was a great step forward, it falls short of being an effective model for reparatory justice, because reconciliation without reform is meaningless. Without accountability and reparations, true justice remains out of reach. And for those of you who still believe that the TRC was right to prioritize reconciliation over retribution, I leave you with the impactful words of Adam Smith. Mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. For these reasons, we, the opposition, strongly oppose this motion. Thank you.
And thank you very much to the first speaker from Queen's College. At this point in time, we're going to now enter into an exciting period of cross-examination. The opposition team is going to ask of Team Barrackpore 3 questions, one at a time, and Barrackpore, you're going to respond to those questions in kind. All right, you'll have 10 seconds to ask your question. Queen's College, Barrackpore, you'll have 30 seconds to answer those questions. Only one person from Queens may ask a question at a time, but the entire Barrackpore West team has the opportunity to respond to that question within that 30-second time frame. Right. Ladies and gentlemen, your time starts when you ask your first question, Queen's College.
Were there not other truth-seeking commissions set up in South Africa post the TRC?
Could you please repeat your question as it wasn't clear?
Apologies. Were there not other truth-seeking commissions set up in South Africa post-apartheid?
Miss, sorry, but we did mention that in my proposition. We did mention that about Rwanda, Colombia, Sierra Leone, and Canada.
All right, Queen's College, next question.
Many countries that experience mass human rights violations, such as Rwanda, prioritize criminal prosecution over truth commissions. Doesn't this suggest that trials are a more effective model than the TRC?
While the TRC primary focus was on truth-telling and reconciliation, it did lay a foundational for government later reparation growth. The TRC recommended material reparations such as a financial compensation, social service, and access to education and healthcare for victims of apartheid violence. Though the scale of reparation may have been perfect or immediate, the TRC legacy contributed to establishment for the reparation funds, which provided support to thousands of victims. Moreover, it shifted the national conversation to the importance of addressing past wrongs and in a historic way.
All right, and for the final question, and we invite both teams to keep the microphones open for this period of cross-examination. Queen's College, your final question.
Okay. Do you honestly believe that transparency is enough to give closure to apartheid victims?
The TRC made significant efforts to hear from as victims as possible. Though it is acknowledged that some groups were underrepresented, however, the TRC's inclusive framework gave a voice to many victims who would have otherwise been overlooked. Women's voices, for example, were underrepresented, but still acknowledged through specific hearing and initiative addressing gender-based violence. The TRC cannot be expected to fully address every voice in deeply fermented society, but it played an essential role in starting the national conversation as needed to recognize all victims affected.
All right, thank you very much for that. We will now flip this arrangement 180 degrees and ask Barrackpore West to field questions to Queen's College.
Given a lack of perfect justice in most post-conflict societies, what makes South Africa's process uniquely flawed rather than an eventable compromise?
As seen in
Sorry.
As seen in other reconciliation aspects carried out by other nations, such as, for example, Rwanda and these other countries who went through issues similar to this, we saw that other measures were taken to ensure that not only were the perpetrators prosecuted, but that the victims were properly compensated for the crimes. And this is the issue.
If the TRC wasn't effective, why has it been widely studied and adopted as a model for transitional justice in other post-conflict societies?
It is important that we acknowledge that influence does not equal success, and that we also acknowledge that even though it was adopted, key changes were made to certain aspects of the plan.
Can you cite an example of a post-conflict society where a purely retributive approach was more successful than the TRC's restorative justice model?
No, at the moment we can't say.
Okay, and that's the totality of your answer, Queen's College, which means, yes, indeed. So your cross-examination period has ended. Thank you very much to both teams for those engaging questions and answers, giving the judges a lot to weigh and to think about. We're now going to move back into the speeches by inviting the Deputy Prime Minister from Barrackpore West to extend the case for that side of the House. And we are ready when you are.
We of the government understand and accept the criticisms of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission on various grounds, including claims that it allowed impunity, failed to deliver justice, and prioritized reconciliation over accountability. However, the opposition is failing to overlook the broader context, the constraints of post-apartheid South Africa, and the long-term benefits of the TRC. Allow us, the government, to address some of these criticism and remind ourselves why the TRC reconciliation process remains an effective model. The TRC allowed perpetrators to escape justice. The TRC was not designed as a replacement for legal prosecution, but rather a mechanism to uncover the truth, provide victims with a voice, and promote national healing. But amnesty was granted in exchange for full disclosure. Those who did not confess remain liable for prosecution. The alternative the opposition is proposing, mass trials, could have overwhelmed the judicial system, led to prolonged conflict, and possibly resulted in instability as seen in other post-conflict societies. It prioritized reconciliation over justice. The TRC focus on reconciliation was pragmatic. A purely retributive approach could have deepened division and fueled further violence. The process recognized that justice could take multiple forms, including restorative justice, which sought to acknowledge victim suffering and provide reparations. Additionally, many victims value truth-telling and public acknowledgement of their pain over punitive measures. The TRC failed to address systemic economic inequalities. While the TRC primarily focused on political violence, it did recommend reparations and institutional reform. You hear that, opposition? The failure to fully implement economic redress lies more with subsequent governments than with the TRC itself. Moreover, addressing structural inequality is a long-term process that requires sustained economic policies beyond the TRC mandate. Many victims did not receive adequate compensation. The TRC did not propose financial reparations, but the responsibility for implementation fell on the government. When not all victims received sufficient compensation, the TRC succeeded in giving them a platform to share their experiences, preserving historical memory, and fostering a culture of accountability. The symbolic recognition of suffering was a critical step towards healing. The TRC findings were politically biased. While no process is entirely free from political influences, the TRC made a concerted effort to investigate abuse on all sides, including those committed by the apartheid state and liberation movement. It provided a comprehensive historical record, which has since been seen invaluable in shaping South Africa's democratic discourse and preventing historical revisionism. But let us humor the opposition for a bit. Given the shortcomings highlighted, we, the government, would like to emphatically state that despite the shortcomings of the TRC model, if the Caribbean uses it as our movement for reparations, we are confident in Caribbean's history of reconciliation and peace. We possess leaders committed and passionate about rotable justice to identify the shortcomings of the TRC, learn from it, and implement solutions to address them. We need to look only to opposition country of Guyana to see how our Caribbean leaders can make amendments to imperfect systems. Guyana's political history offers personal examples of leaders who, despite operating within imperfect systems, endeavored to implement reforms and address systemic issues. Ironically, alumni of Queen's College in Guyana, Forbes Burnham, Chadi Jagan, and Samuel Hines played significant roles in the nation's political evolution. Forbes Burnham, serving as Prime Minister and later President, led Guyana through its transition to a cooperative republic in 1970. His administration pursued policies aimed at reducing foreign economic dominance, including the nationalization of key industries. Chadi Jagan, a prominent opposition figure during Burnham's rule, consistently advocated for democratic socialism, workers' rights. After decades in opposition, he became president in 1992, following Guyana's first free and fair elections with independence. His leadership symbolized a commitment to democratic principles and economic reform. Samuel Hines, an alumnus of Queen's College, served as Prime Minister alongside Bo Jagan and his successor, Janek Jagan. His tenure is noted for effort to stabilize the economy and promote infrastructural development, reflecting a pragmatic approach to governance in existing policy frameworks. These leaders' legacy underscore that even with imperfect systems, dedicated individuals can enact meaningful change. Similarly, like their own president, Dr. Irfan Ali, and Mia Mothy of Barbados have demonstrated their commitment to reparation movement in the Caribbean. While the TRC may not have fully satisfied all expectation, its establishment marked a critical step towards acknowledging past wrongs and fostering dialogue. The South African experience illustrates that reparative justice mechanism, despite imperfection, can serve as an effective model for us in the Caribbean, as Guyana has exemplified, to adapt and refine in our quest for reconciliation and reparative justice. I thank you.
And thank you very much to the Deputy Prime Minister. We now swing the debate back over to Queen's College and invite their Deputy Opposition Leader to extend the case for Team Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, esteemed judges, honorable members of government, distinguished audience, a pleasant morning to you all. Building on the thoughtful points raised by my colleague, I rise today not only to critique the Commission's performance, but to expose the inherent flaws of the entire Truth and Reconciliation process. While the first speaker demonstrated how the process granted amnesty to perpetrators and left victims with unfulfilled promises, I will show that this process itself was fundamentally flawed. It failed to dismantle the economic and institutional vestiges of apartheid. And its very design prioritized confession and reconciliation over material justice. Let's begin by considering the economic and racial inequalities that persist as a legacy of apartheid. Under the apartheid regime, 87% of the South Africans' land was reserved for white ownership, a calculated move to ensure economic dominance. One might expect that a process aimed at reparatory justice would have taken robust measures to rectify this imbalance. Yet, as a 1998 TRC final report makes abundantly clear, the process produced nothing more than symbolic gestures. Today, nearly 72% of South Africa's arable land remains in white hands, as confirmed by the government's November 2017 Land Audit Report. It is here that we recall the visionary words of Nelson Mandela. In his 1994 State of the Nation address, Mandela insisted that genuine reconciliation must include a radical redistribution of wealth and land. He argued that without economic transformation, reconciliation remains a hollow exercise, a mere bandage over festering wounds. How then can we accept a process that by neglecting robust economic reforms leaves the oppressed economically tethered to their past. The government may contend that the TRC laid the groundwork for future reforms, but one must ask, at what point does groundwork stop being an excuse for inaction? The process recommended 3 billion South African rands in victim compensation, an amount that I must say was never fully disbursed, while corporate beneficiaries of apartheid, such as mining conglomerates and international banks, faced no repercussions, as expressed in the article Reflections on Truth and Reconciliation in South Africa by James and Van de Beeger. With all due parliamentary courtesy, it is somewhat laughable when the government insists that symbolic compensation can mend deep economic scars of apartheid by a process that stops at mere were required for strong process itself altered. The TRC process was designed to expose the human rights abuses of apartheid through public confession. Yet it failed to reform the very institution that enabled those abuses. The process may have provided a platform for testimonies in the police, military, and judicial systems. Richard Wilson, in The Politics of Truth and Reconciliation, insists on comprehensive reform, perpetrated injustice to continue functioning under new leadership. Consider the South African Police Service, a direct descendant of the oppressive apartheid security forces. While the TRC process scrutinized, officers were held accountable, and many continued their careers unimpeded. The tragic Maracanã massacre of 2012, where police killed 4 striking minors, is a damning testament to the enduring legacy of these unaddressed institutional flaws. Similarly, discriminatory laws remain largely unchanged and continue to deliver justice selectively, protecting white-collar criminals while punishing the economically vulnerable. But let us not be mistaken. This is not merely a failure of implementation, but a failure of the process itself. A journey of confession over the execution of consequential reforms. A process that was more concerned reparation. Truth without consequences is a lie dressed in the garb of reconciliation, and truth-telling story that leaves structural injustices intact and victims without redress. In conclusion, while the TRC process succeeded in unearthing the brutal truths of apartheid, its design, by failing to secure economic redress and institutional reform, rendered it an effective model for reparatory justice. A process that produces truth without consequences is no process of justice at all. It is a compromise that leaves South Africa ensnared in the economic and political inequities of its past. And for these reasons, we, the opposition, firmly reject the motion. Thank you.
And thank you very much for finishing that segment of the debate. We are now going to move into the second period of cross-examination. We're inviting both teams to leave the mics open for this period. Now, once more, we will ask Team Queen's College to field questions to Barrackpore. The time will begin when you ask your first question.
With all the examples, why has inequity then worsened if the reconciliation process was truly effective?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Sure, no problem. With all the examples, why has inequality then worsened if the reconciliation process was truly effective?
Thank you very much for your question, Honorable Opposition. While the TRC focus was on acknowledging human rights violations of the apartheid era, it is important to note that systemic inequalities created by apartheid required far-reaching structural reform that the TRC was not equipped to tackle. The TRC worked primarily address the emotion and psychological scars of apartheid, not the economic structure that perpetuates inequality. The persistence of racial economic disparity points to the need of ongoing efforts, such as land reform and targeted economic interventions, which are separate from the TRC mandate but are essential for a truly equitable South Africa. Thank you.
How can you say the TRC was successful, equating it to Guyana's political struggle when so few victims received adequate compensation?
Thank you very much for your question, Honorable Opposition. The TRC model was specifically designed for the South African context, which involved a transition from apartheid to democracy, and thus the TRC prioritized national unity and healing over retributive justice. While financial compensation and criminal prosecution have their merits, they were not the primary goal of the TRC. The TRC helped create a unique module of restorative justice that focused on truth-telling, understanding, and reconciliation. It has been praised internationally for its ability to foster healing in a deeply divided society where retributive justice might have fueled further division. I thank you.
Okay. Can you say for certain that prosecutions would fuel one utilized in Canada and Sierra Leone prosecuted oppressors without triggering civil war?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Can you say for certain that prosecutions would fuel further violence if other forms of the TRC, such as the one utilized in Canada and Sierra Leone, prosecuted oppressors without triggering civil war?
Thank you very much for the question. While many South Africans may have felt dissatisfied with the TRC outcome, their discontent often stems from broader context systemic issues that the TRC was not designed to address. The TRC primary focus was exposing the truth and facilitating reconciliation, not solving the country's economic and social challenges. The persistence of inequality and other issues, such as land reform, suggests that TRC was not only one part of the major, much larger, ongoing process of national building and societal change. The dissatisfaction many feel highlights the need for continued effort to address the structural inequalities that apartheid left behind. Thank you.
All right, and thank you very much for that first period of cross-examination. We now invite Barrackpore West Secondary School to field questions to Queen's College.
Thank you. Firstly, the TRC exposed many human rights violations to the public. Doesn't this transparency contribute to the accountability, even if some perpetrators were granted amnesty?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Sure. The TRC exposed many human rights violations to the public. Doesn't this transparency contribute to accountability, even if some perpetrators were granted amnesty?
Was responsible for truth-telling. However, it is important that we acknowledge that this does not portray it as an effective model for reparatory justice, as it is still missing very key components.
Thank you. While some victims felt justice was denied, others saw the TRC as a necessary step towards healing. How do you account for these different perspectives?
The TRC was a necessary step for healing, But I must let you know that it did not complete its obligations as a process for reparatory justice.
Thank you. And lastly, how should a Truth Commission balance the expectation of victims with the practical realities of political transition?
Repeat the question.
Sure. How should a Truth Commission balance the expectations of victims with the practical realities of political transition?
Allow me to once again reiterate the words of Adam Smith: mercy to the guilty is cruelty to the innocent. While balancing those obligations would not have been easy, it was important that the government took the steps necessary to ensure that all victims felt as though they were properly represented. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both teams. Now, to wrap up this debate, we invite the opposition reply speaker from Team Barrackpore West to conclude this debate for Team Proposition. Ready when you're ready, Barrackpore.
We urge this House not to do what the opposition is asking us to do: throw the baby out with the bathwater. They are focusing on not the truth and reconciliation process itself, but rather the inefficiencies of governments to implement some aspects of the TRC's recommendations. The TRC cannot be blamed for the lack of political will. The TRC is an effective model. This is why. First, the process of truth-telling and historical acknowledgement succeeded in documenting the atrocities of apartheid and ensuring they were recognized at a national and global level. In the case of Brian Mitchell and the Trust Feed massacre, Mitchell confessed his role in the massacre before the TRC, expressed deep remorse, and sought forgiveness. His openness led to his release from prison and a reconciliation process with the families of the victims. The Craddock 4 case: 4 anti-apartheid activists were assassinated by security forces. The government had long denied responsibility. During the TRC hearings, former security officer admitted to the killings under orders from high-ranking officials. This public acknowledgement gave the families the truth they had sought for years and exposed the extent of apartheid-era brutality. Second, the TRC's approach to restorative justice was one that sought to repair relationships and heal a divided society. Granting amnesty went a long way toward reconciliation. In the aforementioned case of Brian Mitchell and the Trust Feed massacre, Mitchell applied for amnesty, fully confessed his role, and expressed deep remorse. His honesty helped the victims' families receive the truth about what happened. After release, he worked with the Trust Feed community to promote reconciliation. Additionally, known as Prime Evil, Eugene de Kock was a key leader of apartheid's hit squads. Although de Kock was not granted full amnesty, his extensive confessions helped expose apartheid's crime. His remorseful testimony assisted victims' families in learning the truth, and he was later granted parole in 2015 after some victims advocated for his release. Both cases are real examples of how the TRC was effective in its mandate of truth-telling, amnesty, and reconciliation. This is the TRC's reparations legacy. The South African government paid 30,000 rand in reparations to each of the 22,000 victims identified by the TRC. Additionally, apartheid forces often killed and secretly buried activists. The TRC facilitated the exhumation and dignified reburial of several anti-apartheid fighters, such as the Craddock 4 and Steve Biko. These efforts helped bring closure to families and communities. The TRC recommended community-based reparations, leading to infrastructure projects, including school upgrades and housing developments in historically marginalized areas like Alexandra and Soweto. Finally, To prevent future human rights violations, the TRC recommended the reform of the South African Police Service SAPS. The TRC exposed police brutality and recommended strict oversight and reform of law enforcement. The Independent Police Investigative Directorate, IPID, was created to investigate police misconduct. Today, SAPS operates under a democratic constitution with laws preventing the political abuse of law enforcement. The TRC was instrumental in constitutional and legal reforms, such as South Africa's 1996 constitution. Laws such as the Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act 2000 and the Constitutional Court was established as the highest authority to protect human rights. Last but not least, the TRC paved the way for the Independent Communications Authority of South Africa, ICASA, the Protection of Access to Information Act 2000. Today, South Africa has one of the most robust free press environments in Africa. The Truth and Reconciliation process is an effective model for reparatory justice. The facts are irrefutable. I thank you.
Thank you very much. And to conclude this debate, we invite Queen's College to present their reply speech.
Honorable Speaker of the House, esteemed judges, honorable members of the proposition, and attentive audience, good morning. For the duration of the event, the opposition has sat, listened to, and carefully digested the discourse by the proposition of the House, as they have attempted to justify the claim that the South African Truth and Reconciliation process is an effective model for reparatory justice. However, despite the proposition's attempts to frame truth and reconciliation process utilized by South Africa behind the curtains of national unity and forgiveness over punishment, the opposition will remain unwavering. We will continue to defiantly declare that the South African Truth and Reconciliation process is not an effective model for reparatory justice, and any individual, body, institution, or nation who seeks reparation for the wrongs that were done to them would see to it that the system that provides a reparation is not this model, because their reparation will never be delivered. Throughout their discourse, the proposition has mentioned the TRC several times. However, esteemed judges and distinguished audience, I must bring it to your attention that this debate is not only about the TRC. We are here discussing whether or not the truth reconciliation process is an effective model. And due to the mandates of the process, it is not just truth seeking, but accountability. And accountability can never be achieved without economic reparation. The first speaker mentioned that the TRC delivered truth and the acknowledgement of wrongs. However, what the proposition has failed to mention, that truth is not truth when it is incomplete. Several of the different criminals who went and applied for amnesty and also got the amnesty that they applied for did not tell the whole wrongdoings that they had done. Further, several of the criminals who were known for their wrongdoings during the time of apartheid did not apply for amnesty, nor were they prosecuted after the TRC had finished its process. For example, take P.W. Botha, who was a prime minister during the peak of apartheid, who said, I will never ask for amnesty, I will never apologize, and I will never kneel before them. And he faced no time in prison, no reparatory process was done to him, and no justice was given to the people who were wronged by him. Has the forgiveness of these egregious actions of those who accepted amnesty and those who didn't even apply for it provided any justice to the groups who were freely persecuted in the period of apartheid? The first speakers also mentioned that the TRC recommended restitutional reforms and reparations. However, it is important to note that during the process of reparation, these reforms were not committed to the ideals of the TRC, nor were they committed to the satisfaction of the people who were wronged. It was recommended in the final report of the TRC that 3 billion rand be given in reparations over a period of 6 years. However, the government decided to give their reparations in a one-off grant that only came up to about 660 million rand. Further, The first speaker also mentioned that the TRC has influenced other Truth and Reconciliation Commissions throughout the world, but we must ensure that we understand that influence is not a measure of success. What metric can we measure to show that influence measures efficacy? Further, the first speakers also mentioned that Rwanda took model from South Africa. But what we must also understand that Rwanda in the end of its genocide did not simply take a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, but also had genocide trials to ensure punitive justice was delivered to the people who had wronged. The second speaker has made mention that the TRC, the idea of political conflict and civil, is purely speculative, as there is no empirical data to prove that if the TRC or another solution that used another form of justice was implemented in the time of South Africa, that civil war would have broken. Mentioned that the TRC was just a step, a foundation, a groundwork. But if it was a step towards justice, why have we seen so little justice since then? In the words of Nelson Mandela, justice is not served until those who suffered see meaningful change in their lives. And as mentioned by the speakers, a TRC and the TRP have ignored the TRC has ignored accountability for amnesty and has repeated to correct everything that was done. This has not eliminated the commonalities of the time, as the country remains divided both racially and economically. The TRP may have allowed for truth and the removal of tension, but in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., true peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice, and no justice was delivered, not to those who were persecuted, not to those who were segregated, and not to those who were manipulated. Therefore, I stand again on the cause of not an effective model for reparatory justice. And if any of us desire true justice in the matters of our reparatory cause, we will ensure that this model is not the one that we follow. Thank you.
And thank you very much to both teams for a wonderful kickoff to the International Reparation Debate Competition 2025. After an exciting match, the judges are now going to excuse themselves to deliberate to find out who will be moving on to round 2. And we will return shortly with the results.
The Caribbean region's desire for reparations for colonialism stems from the profound economic, social, and cultural injustices inflicted during centuries of exploitation.
We are Form 6 students and debate champions at Barrackpore Secondary School in Trinidad and Tobago. My name is Caitlin Mohammed,
Roland Armstrong, Kevin Armstrong,
Charlotte Namdan. Proponents assert that financial compensation and restorative justice are critical for repairing these historical wrongs and empowering future generations.
Opponents question the fairness of assigning responsibility to contemporary societies for the actions of their ancestors.
Now, that's why Barrackpore West Secondary School need to be at this debate competition.
We attend Queen's College, a 180-year-old institution
that benefited from and was built on the premises of slavery.
However, we are diverse group of descendants of those manipulated to help this institution and many others
now benefit from the legacy, reputation, and opportunity it grants us.
This is what we believe truly represents reparation.
Not the handing out of funds or the granting of apologies,
but the molding of systems not intended for us into pathways that empower us to create and continue lasting legacy.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this International Reparation Debate Competition. This International Reparation Debate Competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparations so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
And this initiative is phenomenal. And you know why? Because it's engaging with young people. And it's young people that I believe, are going to be the future of the reparatory justice movement. The greatest weapon that there is in this whole fight for reparatory justice is the young people of today. I hope this debate spurs a whole new generation of advocates for reparatory justice, and the UK and the EU have got to make amends for the ills of the transatlantic slavery. This is going to be a phenomenal competition.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional / international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are, that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Where is the justice for the 5 million enslaved Africans trafficked to the Caribbean? Think about it. Chattel slavery didn't just end. It left deep, painful scars across each Caribbean country. The deliberate underdevelopment, the brutal trauma and violence we inherited. It's time to repair this damage so we can build thriving, sustainable economies where young people like us can dream big, achieve more, and live better lives right here in our own home. Do you see why repair matters? Stand with us. Join the calls for justice and sign the petition for reparations at repaircampaign.org/petition.
It's very important that this is understood because we can't talk about legacies before talking about what left those legacies on our landscape. Enslaved Africans were subjected to the worst atrocities imaginable: kidnapping, storage in filthy barrackpores, the Middle Passage, forced drowning as in the case of the slaver Zong, branding with hot iron, including by the church, with SPG being seared into the flesh of those they owned, unrelenting field and factory labor, legal codes that rendered them non-human, and harsh punishments when they resisted enslavement, deportation, dismemberment, hanging, imprisonment, severe flogging, including of women and the children. According to Lucille Mathurin Mayer, and I quote, "Neither age nor pregnancy exempted women from corporal punishment. Rather, they were laid down in the filthiest place the driver could find for floggings. Child labor was rampant, and women and girls faced sexual violence." Orlando Patterson wrote in his Sociology of Slavery the following: "The sexual exploitation of female slaves by white men was the most disgraceful aspect of Jamaican slave society." Unfortunately, the church was complicit in this crime against humanity. Initially, Christian planters did not think that the African was of theological significance. According to Elsa Gavaya, and I quote, "Early English slave law almost totally neglected the enslaved as a subject for religious instruction, as a member of a family, or as a member of society possessing some rights, as the same rights as everyone else."
Did you grow up on Anansi stories? Yep, most of us have. But did you know that Anansi played a major role in our ancestors' survival? So let's talk about it. He's more than just a trickster spider. He was a means of inspiration for resistance.
Anansi's cleverness in outsmarting his rivals mirrored tactics enslaved people used in their daily lives. By pretending to be foolish or inept, a technique known as play fool for catch wise, enslaved people lower their enslavers' expectations and reduce suspicion. These methods, inspired by Anansi, are known as Anansi tactics, or in Chui from Ghana, Anansi Sem. Anansi outwitted powerful animals and even white enslavers using cunning and wit. During the plantation era, Anansi tales were shared in enslaved quarters and sometimes in front of European enslavers. These stories, recorded in journals, reveal how enslaved people used public performances to mask hidden defiance. Plantation whites often missed the rebellious messages in these tales. Caribbean Anansi stories depict him evading punishment, tricking enslavers, and a whole plethora of adventures which highlight the resistance and survival through Anansi tactics.
400 years ago, my people were dragged from their homes, tribes, families, placed on floating wood, and shipped across the Atlantic to what will be later described as the most inhumane act of all time. Cold, dark, uncomfortable, cannot describe the trip in ships where whips did not fail to miss. Injustice, rape and disgrace, blood rains, brute, force, ignorance, hate in their veins. Sweat and tears, labor revealed, produce from king fields only for the esteemed. 400 years of eroding one's pride, culture, heritage, value. 400 years of the iron chain, stringing up, leaving bare. Oh, but they never cared. Why fight when you would be met with sharp blades? So don't you dare cry out in fear. Why not plan escape with the plaiting of one's hair? the drums, listen, dance, communicate. For tonight, we fight a battle not even death could spare. Blue eyes, white skin, Master said there's beauty within. But guess what? Black, brown, gold, royalty, reparations, we are owed. Them say hassa, but we say cassava. That's where we get the strength from to beat and conquer. For tonight, we're returning to Ghana. You may say, I'm a descendant of slaves because of the rich melanin that gushes from my pores. But I came to tell you tonight, I am not a slave, rather the descendant of kings and queens. I am the embodiment of the divine. I do not chase, I align, I attract. What's meant for me already has my name on it. I am the personification of beauty, the expression of love, the creator of life, the acknowledgement of freedom. So go ahead, call me what you want, because when I die, bury me in the oceans where my ancestors jumped from the ships, because they knew death was better than bondage.
And here's what does need reparative justice. It is the seasoning period when we landed on the soil and they took away our names and our gods and our culture, and no slave system that we understand thus far has ever had that deculturalization process embedded in the process of our enslavement. So our enslavement was not just physical, it was not just culture, it was spiritual, because you took me away from everything. Who then must I look up to? Who then must I emulate? Who then must I kill myself in order to elevate you?
What is common about the wealth? A flag raises high, but the strings still pull from London. We sing our anthems in borrowed tongues, march to the beat of siphons' drums, celebrating a freedom that still pays tribute. Independent? What is that when the governor's shadow still lingers? They tell us, we free. Tell that to the bones at Rapparees. The 196 who fought and won only to drown in chains. Our Negmawan. Do the people of North Devon not hear the howls raging for their home? The tide spits their cries, their names foam in fury, salted by a sea that will not forget. They call us independent, yet a crown still sits above 14 nations, still bent at the knee, still ruled by a throne built from our gold. They took our labor, snatched our names, they welcomed our craft, then cast us adrift. Windrush mothers, fathers, exiled from the empire they built. What is common about the wealth? Our persistent potency that perseveres through acute artistry. We carve language into legacy, turn sorrow into song, drum resistance as rhythm, sink steel into symphony. We are the architects of new worlds, the poets, the painters, the prophets, who make home in remnants still, who forge futures from fractured pasts. They took the wealth, but we are the riches.
And remember that chattel slavery of the African people was also genocide. This is not highlighted sufficiently. If you take my home island of Barbados in the Caribbean, the British brought 600,000 people into Barbados. 600,000 Africans were brought into Barbados. The black population of Barbados today is 280,000. How do you reduce 600,000 to 290,000 after 200 years? They brought 3 million into Jamaica. At the end of the slavery malarkey, there were just about 600,000. The survival rate of African people in the Caribbean was about 17%. It was horrendous.
The Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community.
But I will say to you, therefore, that the issue of reparations for the transatlantic slavery is an issue that we will take up with you, and that the appropriate apology and compensation is paid, and that the international community accepts that this should never happen again.
And yes, Honorable Deacon Mitchell, slavery is a crime against humanity.
The concept of reparations would take the question of development repair, and it would be multi-generational. What needs to happen is face-to-face discussions, which we deem as absolutely important, because if you can't see me or hear me, it is not appropriate to be able to make a judgment as to who or what I am and what I should receive.
Progress also means reparatory justice to heal historical wounds and climate justice to secure our future. We must be bold, demand what is old, and build a Caribbean that thrives.
The Center for Reparation Research is thrilled to launch this international reparation debate competition. This international reparation debate competition that we launched today for secondary schools is one of our most important projects. How do we engage youth on matters of reparatory justice? The change needed in the education system can only be advanced when the youth are engaged and their voices are heard.
Why is reparation so important in and for the Caribbean? Because time comes for justice for our ancestors. Time comes for the Caribbean to insist on the right to development, to be compensated for the violence against our ancestors. So outreach to the young people who have joined this movement is critical.
And this initiative is phenomenal. And you know why? Because it's engaging with young people. And it's young people that I believe, okay, are going to be the future of the reparatory justice movement. The greatest weapon that there is in this whole fight for reparatory justice is the young people of today. I hope this debate spurs a whole new generation of advocates for reparatory justice, and the UK and the EU have got to make amends for the ills of the transatlantic slavery. This is going to be a phenomenal competition.
There is no mass movement that isn't a youth movement. And we certainly want reparations to be a mass movement. So it's really exciting, though, to have a regional stroke international debating competition. And I'm looking forward to your participation as you construct your arguments for and against, remembering that the 10-point plan for reparatory justice is our guiding framework for the areas in which we are demanding compensation, because we certainly want to impact the public opinion and awareness in Europe. So it's fantastic to have the United Kingdom participating as well.
So why is it important for youth to be involved in the reparation movement? Being involved in the reparations movement is critical to youth if one is to know their history so that they can understand why their societies are functioning as they are today. The future of the countries we live in are dependent on the current situation that exists today in our countries. And these current conditions were created by the past, including indigenous genocide, African enslavement, indentureship, and colonization. Being involved in reparations is about seeking justice, seeking a way to reduce inequalities in our own countries and then in the broader world. It's about seeking a more peaceful and balanced world, where global problems are solved in partnerships, not in isolation. I believe the sponsors are hoping this competition will allow our youth to gain knowledge about the past so that as young people, you'll be able to make better decisions in the future and make our countries better places.
We know that we need to understand stories about people that look like us. So the fact that so many of you young people have registered was so encouraged by your enthusiasm and your passion for wanting to enter this debate. It is so important. It's just at the core of who we are that we need to understand where we come from, understand our true history, and having a debate competition on this particular topic is such an important milestone. To have a real conversation about repair, and the fact that our young people were so articulate with their presentations, and to ensure that we keep educating our young people, because you are the future of us and are the Caribbean's a sustainable future. So congratulations, everybody.
We are looking forward to the debate. Encourage everyone to join the debate. Thank you so much, all.
Welcome back to this, the first match in round one of the International Reparation Debate Competition 2025, where we saw Barrackpore West Secondary School face off against Queen's College, Trinidad and Tobago versus Guyana. And they debated the motion. This house believed that South Africa's truth and reconciliation process was an effective model for reparatory justice. We had a wonderful, wonderful debate. The judges were unanimously impressed with what we thought was a really excellent debate. It is clear that we're dealing with very bright and intelligent students here who I'm not sure are new to the sport of debate, because what we saw was compelling argumentation and pointing out of assumptions and just beautiful analysis. So let me be a little bit more distinct. What did we hear from the debate? Well, we heard from Team Barrackpore West that the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation model, is one that it exists not necessarily to provide a restitutive justice or reconciliatory justice. Its purpose isn't necessarily to ensure that we get back the land distribution or we get back the physical, financial reparations. Its purpose primarily is to ensure that victims feel heard, that we get that kind of reconciliation, and we understood that there is some value in that. We wanted to know a little bit more from the team proposition. Why is it that the value that we get from restorative justice, hearing the perpetrators of these particular crimes and the awful things that they do, is one that or trumps any sort of material compensation that we can get. In fact, we weren't 100% sold that the delineation of what justice looks like is a sufficient one under team proposition. We needed to understand why it is sufficient for justice to simply be that social justice. Just telling us that justice can take the place of social justice and then saying that's the purpose of the TRC, we thought was not sufficient. We wanted to understand why it is that is in fact a legitimate form of justice. And so that was something that we wanted to hear a little bit more. So based on that then, we heard that there are issues that should have been solved that simply were not solved. We heard from Queen's College, and they tell us all of these particular issues that are not solved. The fact that a majority of the land in South Africa is still owned by the white man, and that any true reparation requires some massive redistribution of wealth, and that is something that is impactful, and that is something that is important. Again, we wanted a clearer clash analysis on why that model of reparations, that is restitutive justice, trumps social justice. We wanted to hear that a little bit more, especially in propositions very explicit claim that social justice is sufficient. We wanted to hear more flagging why social justice is not sufficient and is not a legitimate model of reparations. We also heard this analysis that the TRC's written plan included an extent of reparations of $3 billion, but it couldn't give that $3 billion. It only gave 900 mil with an outstanding bill of 2.1 mil. And that in and of itself was only granted to individuals who registered, which is a far less amount than the amount of people who are actually effective. And we heard that there's some sort of condemnation from team opposition that is the reason why it's not sufficient to just get that kind of reconciliation. We particularly loved from team Barrackpore this idea that there is a psychological benefit and an aid to be get from having this reconciliation process. And again, Team Queens counteracted that by questioning the effectiveness of that, saying that reliving these kinds of trauma is not actually a good thing and sometimes can lead to actually worse outcomes, right? And so we're not necessarily wanting to engage and to do that kind of thing. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say, one, that I, as the chair judge and my wing judges, were thoroughly impressed. It is no indictment on either team on their performance. In fact, the scores ending this competition, this match, one team, the losing team, on 268 points, and the winning team on 274 points, a 6-point difference. And in fact, the team that got 268 points, I've seen matches before where a score of 268 points is a match-winning score, And so I want to commend both teams for doing very, very well. Now, with all that said, you want to know who the winner is. The winner of this match and the team that will be moving on to round 2 of this competition is the team from Guyana, Queen's College. Congratulations, Queen's College. And I must say, very, very, very well tried. Barrackpore West. The best speaker for this match comes to us from the winning team, Queen's College, and that is the second speaker, Saraya Walcott. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We will now take a break and return to you 12 p.m. sharp. That is Jamaica time, where we will see the second match in round one, day one of the International Reparation Debate Competition, where we will see York Castle High School facing off from Arima North Secondary, a Jamaican team, York Castle, facing off against Arima North from Trinidad and Tobago. And they will be debating the motion. This house believes that the descendants of enslavers should not bear direct responsibility for reparations. We will see you at 12 p.m.